Welcome to the Private Property Farming Podcast. My name is Mbali Nwoko, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Today I'm riding solo, no guest, and it's just me and you for the next 30 minutes or so discussing how to turn your hobby farm or hobby project into a sustainable or lucrative business. I think this show is pretty much for individuals who've been doing backyard gardening and, have a passion for growing their own food or raising their own cattle, whatever the case might be, but just starting something from a small scale and then realizing that, hang on, there's actually a market for this and people want my product. A number of farmers started in this industry just by default. And what I mean by default is simply because they started doing something that they love, which is a passion project. And then people just started noticing, and it started simply from family, from friends, people buying the products from them. And eventually, what it is that they were farming, let's say if it's peppers, for example, in their backyard garden, just started getting a lot of demand from family and friends, and then, word of mouth spreads. And then all of a sudden you have a client that's interested in a product, and now you're figuring out, how do I get more of these peppers to sell to the clients that want my peppers? And so this podcast this evening is pretty much going to be centered around that. So I'm just going to unpack just how do you gradually grow from a hobby farming production at a small scale, from a backyard or in a small plot, to turning it into a business. And then how do you manage and control your costs? How do you do the marketing? What value add you could provide to service clients much better, and as well just looking at the long-term growth and sustainability and how do you bring on employees and pretty much just grow the business from there. So if you have any questions, and if I could be speaking to you this evening, please drop in your questions. I'm happy to answer. I love engaging with you guys at home because it just makes the farming podcast more interactive and we get to share ideas and knowledge. Most importantly, take notes of all the critical stuff that we'll be talking tonight. But before I forget, I just want to mention that over and above the farming podcast, Private Property has other podcasts that are available on a weekly basis. And we're starting off with Zamantungwa Kumalo, who is the host of the daily Private Property podcast, where she brings in experts in the property industry and they discuss an array of topics. So she comes live every weekday at 7:00 and definitely has guests and unpack really critical issues or pertinent issues relating to property. And so also on the weekly basis, we have SD Clarkson with the First Time Home Buyer Show, where she pretty much interviews people that have been in the property journey, started off buying, buying one house and then grew from 1 to 3 to 5 to 10, and they've grown again, I suppose their hobby, their interest into a business, and now they're owning a portfolio of different properties. So every Wednesday, SD also brings in guests just to talk about their journeys in the property space, their challenges, their opportunities, their learnings, and how they've been able to grow their property portfolio. And obviously, every Tuesdays and Thursdays with myself at 8:00 is the Farming Podcast, where we discuss all your farming needs. And we obviously always have a guest onto the show. Sometimes I ride solo just to obviously unpack some questions that we sometimes always get onto the show, or things that we know that might be of interest to you. And then lastly, on the weekend, we have Chad, where he showcases very high-end properties in South Africa. That's quite an exciting one because he gets to visit very, very affluent suburbs, profile very high net worth properties. And he kind of gives us property goals, if you could say, something that we want to dream of and be in houses that we'd definitely like to dream of and be in or live in one day. So these are all the podcasts that are available at Private Property. So obviously during the week, we've got you. Even on the weekend, we've definitely got you. So if you're feeling bored, definitely wanting to binge on some awesome content, I think the private property family has definitely got an array of content that will keep you busy during the week and over the weekend. But let's get into today's show. I'm just really going to go and unpack this quite slowly. And please, if there's anything you want me to repeat, let me know. So going back to our topic today, it's basically how to turn your hobby farming into a sustainable business. I don't really like to use the word sustainable sometimes because it gets misconstrued. But to cut it straight to the point is how to turn your hobby farm into a business. And I want to start off with saying that, some people grow food in their backyard gardens where they could be herbs, etc. And most of the time, people find themselves with excess of food. So, for example, if you love planting herbs, whether it's basil, mint, wild rocket, etc., and you like to put it into your kitchen, into your recipes every single night, but always find yourself having excess of that produce, and you decide that let me just give this to friends, let me give this to family, so that they can also eat it and incorporate it in their meals on a daily basis. And should you find yourself in a position where the demand just keeps growing and friends and family repeat and come back to you and just repeatedly ask for more, then this is an opportunity for you to turn it into a business. And this is where I would encourage you to start exploring, going to your nearest greengrocer or retail and see how they package those herbs, for example. Get some punnets. Put those herbs, whether it's basil, for example, put it in a small punnet and package it in a nice way where it can be presentable and that you could share it to the friends and family that need it. And if they're willing to buy it, whether it's at 10 Rand or 20 Rand a punnet, start off with the price that you feel is sufficient for you. And if they're willing to buy it, then you know that you have a product. And moving away from maybe herbs, if you have a passion for livestock, if you like to raise goats, sheep, and cattle, have a small kraal back at home, and you probably own 5 or 6 goats or 10 cows, for example, and you find that all the time people come to you and say, I'd like to buy a goat, I'd like to buy a sheep, I'd like to buy a cow, how much is it? Suss around in the markets in terms of what's the going price. I know in Johannesburg, depending on the size and the weight, a live goat could be anything between 1,500 to 2,000 Rand. A sheep is almost the same, 1.2, 1.5. Again, it's depending on the size, the weight, etc. And, if you find that you're very good at livestock and you have a passion for livestock and you've got a bit of livestock that you don't mind just selling off just to get a few rands or a bit of income, and you definitely have clients or customers that really want to buy those goats, that is a business on itself, because what you could essentially do is find more goats, breed, raise them, and then sell more to the clients. And I think it's important to emphasize that you need to do this gradually. Take your time with it. See how the market responds. Customers always have something to say about your product. Even if they're happy with the goat, they'd come back next time and say, okay, the last one I bought was great, but maybe do you have one in a specific color, for example, a specific weight? Some might have a preference in terms of the gender of the livestock that they're buying. Make sure if you've got that, sell it. If you don't, see if you could source it from another farmer or someone else who's got some goats and buy from them, and then you sell to your customers. This is really how you can start farming with little to no experience. Your experience is pretty much starting this enterprise from a hobby and turning it into a business. Moving on to something that we don't usually always discuss onto the show is, and I'll take the herb example again, is that, there's a huge demand for dry products, fruits and vegetables dried, right? And or processed, because the drying part is pretty much processing. So if you're good at growing herbs, you could dry that up and turn it into a spice. You could, if you like growing vegetables, for example, peppers, you could also dry those up, harvest them, put it out in the sun, let it dry, and it could turn into you could turn it into a spice or process it and incorporate it into something else that is a value added product. If you enjoy making fruit juices, for example, and you head over to the local fresh produce markets and you buy fruits in bulk, whether it's pineapple, apple, mango, orange, and you become an expert in mixing all these different fruits, and the end product becomes a fantastic fruit juice, then I think this is also another business opportunity for you. You could definitely package that fruit juice, put it in a lovely bottle, whether it's plastic, whether it's from a plastic bottle or a paper bottle. Start selling it to friends or start giving it away as just a gift and see how the response looks like. If people are saying, this is very delicious, I want more, how did you do this? Then I think it's something that you need to explore and see if you could produce it in scale. So pretty much turning your kitchen into a fully fledged processing facility. And I think the same goes with vegetables as well. If you have, if you're very weight conscious or healthy, a health fanatic or freak, and you like to mix ingredients, basically buying spinach or kale and adding a bit of ginger into it. I mean, I think COVID has brought that out of us, really, to become quite creative in the kitchen and, whilst looking after the food that we consume in the house and just our weight. For those people who like to take vegetables and also turn it into a fruit juice, this is something that you could explore by packaging it, sending to immediate friends and family, people that you know, even your colleagues at work if you've returned back to the office. Get the response, see how they're liking it, and if obviously they approve of the product that I think for the purpose of the podcast we'll say product because we are talking business terms. If they approve of the product that you've just made, whether it's a vegetable juice or a fruit juice, I think this is something to definitely consider and say, if I had to sell it to you at 10 Rand, would you buy it? Yes or no? And if they agree, then go out and start researching the market. What is the best packaging material that you could use to ensure longevity and lifespan for your product, to make sure that, even when your customer refrigerates it, they can drink it the next day and it will still be as fresh. So I think start exploring the different packaging materials that you could use specifically for the commodity or the product that you're sourcing. Once you've found the packaging supplier, I think you could also move then to branding. But that could happen later because you obviously want to minimize your cost from the get-go. So start packaging that product, even if it's a no-name brand, send it to the friends, and if they order again, keep repackaging, keep producing that product and sending it to them, ensuring that you are consistent with the quality that you're offering and that your deliverables and your deliverables meet your clients' expectations. And as they say in business, there's no better critic than yourself, and most importantly, the people that will tell you the truth and still love you at the end of the day is definitely your friends and family. So they'll be the ones that will give you the feedback on just the taste, the flavor, the packaging, the size, the weight of your product. And this is all research. It's market research for your product that you're slowly trying to develop. So I think just to unpack the few points that I've mentioned before is to say, if you are a person who is passionate about growing their own fruits and vegetables in the garden, and there's friends and family who want to buy from you and you have excess of produce at the end of the day, continue to give them and see if you could turn this into a business, particularly if they want more of the product every week, to say the least. Furthermore, if you have a small kraal in the homelands, or if you've got a big enough property that allows you to raise chicken, cattle, goats, sheep, and you get some inquiries from nearby friends or family to say, I'd like to buy the goats from you. You could definitely explore this and turn it into and turn it into a business where you're fully servicing an available market. And then furthermore, look at opportunities where you could process. So if you enjoy mixing fruits, mixing vegetables, turning it into a juice, etc. That is also a product, and that's obviously value add and providing a processing product into the market. This all goes into farming. I mean, it's primary agriculture, it's secondary agriculture. You're pretty much operating across the value chain. As well, I think I mentioned this in one podcast before that we had a couple of weeks back, to say, if you're very good in selling or marketing, but you see so many opportunities in the agricultural space, primarily so where you see that there are farmers who are fantastic at growing products, but are not really good salesmen or saleswomen. You could then come in there and buy the products from them and sell it off to a ready available market, ensuring that you obviously have full control of your logistics, full control of the quantities that you'll be buying from the farmers on a daily basis, and managing the relationship between the farmer and the client, because you're the one that's interfacing with both these individuals. And so you need to meet both the expectations at the end of the day, price your product accordingly to ensure that at the end of the day, you are making a profit. And let's just talk about the costs. Essentially, when I say do research about the packaging, the marketing, understand for how long do customers, how often do customers want to buy your product? How are you going to package it? What's the cost of the packaging? How much vegetables, for example, do you have to buy in order to make 10 bottles of fruit juice? How much does that grocery a list of vegetables that you're buying costs versus selling a fruit, the bottle per unit at the end of the day? If you have to go and deliver it to your friends and family, calculate the kilometers that you have to drive, the petrol that you have to use. These are small things that really start to give you a full picture of how your business, your agribusiness, can be formed. And essentially, this is what farmers do every day, whether they're growing grains, which is field crops such as maize, wheat, sorghum, sunflower, or you're a vegetable farmer like myself, growing vegetables and selling it to different retailers and wholesalers, or whether you're a livestock farmer selling your livestock directly to the consumers, to abattoirs, etc. All of these businesses have something in common. We have to manage and control our costs. We have to do a cash flow forecast to understand what are the input costs that goes into raising our cattle, growing the product, growing the food, harvesting X amount of bunches of spinach, for example, on a daily basis, versus what's the price when I have to sell it to the market. And then you work back your profit margins in between that. Are you making a profit? How many people do you have to employ at the end of the day? So for those of you that always ask, I want to start farming, but I don't know where to start, I think these are just small, simple solutions to say, even if you've got a half a hectare farm and not necessarily farming in your backyard garden, but you've been producing spinach on, 100 by 50 square meters piece of land, or half a hectare, or a quarter of hectare. Start small and gradually grow. It's best if you gradually grow, because this is where you get to see your mistakes and the areas that you're making, especially from a production input. Because when you quickly grow too big, too fast, you lose control of the costs in your business, and you won't really get a good handling of your business and its model. So basically, from managing a cost, manage your cost from an input perspective versus how much you need to sell the product. And also maybe think of things like discounts, because customers will always ask, how much is it if I buy in bulk? So if you're going back to the fruit juice example, if you're selling 10 fruit juices, maybe have a bulk price versus a person just buying one of that. And this is how as you're turning your kitchen into a processing facility, at the end of the day, you might be looking for processing facility space, where you have to find a small warehouse to start buying processing tools and machinery to obviously make sure that you can produce in volumes, because now you've moved from your house producing 1 to 10 bottles. Now you need to produce 10 to 100. This is pretty much how agribusinesses are formed. But not forgetting that when you do start that business, please register it at the CIPC, because at the end of the day, you don't know where your business could be and how fast it could grow. And you might pretty much find yourself where you've got a lot of demand and not a shortage of product, not enough product to supply or meet that demand. And this is where the funding element comes in, where you'd need more processing machinery, that you need to, dice the fruit or slice the fruit, squeeze the fruit, and obviously turn it into a liquid form. Whatever your process is to obviously ensure that you are adding a value on that fruit juice, you might need to think of funds to buy machinery and equipment, anything that will capitalize or your production facility. And it's important that when you're starting small, you keep record of these small sales. Even if it's just writing from an invoice book, keep record of these sales, so that you know how often do customers buy from you at different seasons, and at different times of the month as well. And this is how you could to say, okay, if customers are buying typically on the 15th of the month, then you know that going towards the 15th, you obviously need to capacitate your production or your facility a lot more, buy a lot of more products, buy a lot of vegetables, buy a lot of fruits, to ensure that by the 15th, you can meet that demand. And if you see that by the 1st or the 2nd of the month, the demand is not so high, then you could control your costs and make sure that you don't have too much stock on hand, which could potentially go to waste. So these are just some of the things in which you could do and really analyze in how you could just manage and control your costs when starting this business. And obviously going into getting clients, access to market is a huge challenge for many farmers. Many farmers, like I previously mentioned, would say, I'm good at growing peppers, I'm good at raising my livestock, I'm good at ensuring that I could raise good chickens at the end of the day. But I really struggle and fail when it comes to markets. How do I position myself in front of clients? How do I communicate with clients? How do I price my product when I'm speaking to clients? How do I manage payment terms with clients? Do I have to draft an offtake agreement, a standard SLA, service level agreement with clients, to ensure that I'm protected at the end of the day and the client is protected at the end of the day, and that there are no gray areas when it comes to us doing business. These are the things that you need to consider and ask yourself when you're looking and trying to approach market for your product. Because sometimes farmers quickly go out, they find markets, they have a verbal agreement with a potential customer. You find that the customer the next day doesn't pay or honor the invoice as you had agreed or arranged in terms of the price. And maybe they start giving you challenges, and when they have to repay your invoices. Furthermore, as well, customers could disappoint. You might be harvesting a certain quantity on that day that you would have agreed on maybe the night before. And on that day, they call you and tell you, I'll just take half of what we'd agreed of, because maybe on my end, also my clients are not requiring a lot of stock today. What do you do in those instances? So I think from access to market, it's not really about being happy to say, yes, I found a client, we've agreed on a price, I'm ready to go. I think you need to start having serious meetings and conversations with the client to say, what happens in a scenario where I've been badly affected by climate change and I can't supply the agreed quantities? what's the consequences there? Or what happens, for example, when I've arranged with you to say, you're going to buy my chickens consistently. Maybe I'm supplying 100 chickens every single day. But now, like we're seeing in the poultry industry, there's bird flu. What happens if there's a virus that's going around, which is affecting your chicken production, and you can't supply to a client, whereas the client is banking really on you to deliver the chickens on that day? What happens in that scenario? So I feel like you definitely need to always protect yourself as an entrepreneur, especially as you're gradually moving from something that you've just started as a hobby and now becoming a business. Because once it is a business, it's a whole different ball game. And especially if you're dealing with food products, there's certain expectations that a client wants you to meet, and you can't really mess around with that product, especially if you're dealing with livestock, especially if you're dealing with perishable products like fruits and vegetables. You need to understand your market. You need to have consistent conversations with your client and keep abreast of their changes in their business as well, because that will pretty much impact your business directly as well. So I think finding markets, start doing research. If you're growing herbs in your backyard garden, going back to that herbs idea, maybe and you could see that the nearby greengrocer retailer doesn't really have that specific herb that you're growing in your backyard garden on their shelves. So let's say you're growing basil, for example, and you have gotten traction with clients with packaging and branding that basil, and you're selling directly to clients. That is an opportunity right there. And if you want to diversify and go into retail and supplying a few quantities into that greengrocer, it's definitely worth talking to the manager who's managing that vegetable section or that herb section, and just saying, if I could bring 10 or 50 punnets every second day or once a week, how much would that be? Would there be a demand? And obviously, I think most of the time they'd say yes, especially if they need that product. And you could definitely start small and just say, I'm growing this in my backyard, but the product is good. It's got good quality. It's definitely got a long shelf life. And if you can package it and brand it quite well, where it's really appealing to the eye, where customers would definitely want to buy, trust me, then you're definitely in business with that local retailer or greengrocer. This is how many farmers start, especially with promoting their products. It's really about taking a few samples, going to speak to the managers, find out if they're willing to buy directly from you. The opportunity here is that some retailers are franchise owned. So some of the owners sometimes walk the stores on the floors. Sometimes they check the products. Trust me, talking from experience, managers are always looking for suppliers. Franchise owners are always looking for suppliers, because not all of them really want to depend on the fresh produce market in buying produce, because sometimes the fresh produce market does fail them where product is not there. So they would like to definitely have that relationship with the farmers directly, and obviously talking about future plans and production and future quantities of supply that could be coming into their stores. So this is where the opportunity lies, of really turning something that you are passionate about, that you deem as a hobby, that could become a sustainable agribusiness. You might be farming that basil on your windowsill or in your backyard garden. Tomorrow, the demand might be so huge where you're now looking for 1 hectare of a piece of land where you could scale up your basil production. And obviously, once you go fully fledged into the farming aspect, yes, you have to obviously manage your costs, like I mentioned, manage the supply in terms of access to markets, having a solid agreement in place, drafted in paper, detailing your expectations as a farmer, the expectations as a client. But then furthermore, where it gets a bit complicated is that now you're in full-scale farming. Now you have to consider things like climate change. what happens in the summer season, what happens in the winter season. How do I protect my crops from frost? How do I protect my crops from rain? How do I protect my crops from pests and diseases? This is where now you have to bring in more established relationships from input suppliers to help you manage your investment, because your crops at the end of the day is your investment. Because if you don't have that crop, you have no business. If you don't have the product and you've got customers, you don't have a business at the end of the day. It's important that you meet your customers' expectations, and through that trade, you obviously are able to get rand value out of your product or service. So that's pretty much it. I'm seeing it's a bit quiet today. No questions, but I think if you have any questions, please do feel free to chat and really interrogate me in what I'm saying, because some of these things that I'm talking about is pretty much from learned experience over the past 5 years that I've been farming. But for those of you really who have land and are farming and are really struggling to grow your farm into a sustainable business or into a long-term business, these are the things that you need to look at, is to say, which are the areas where I'm struggling in this operation and where do I need help? Do your research. Online is your best friend, and the Private Property Farming Podcast is your best friend as well. This is where you could get information, and that's pretty much how you scale your operation into a fully fledged business. And then we bring in things like employees, etc. And then you start strategizing for your long term and how you're going to position your farm or your agribusiness in the market at the end of the day. But I think what I can definitely assure you is never underestimate small beginnings, never underestimate learned experience. And learned experience could be, yes, you might not have a degree in crop production or animal production, but the learned experience is that you know how to plant herbs. You know what goes into that pot plant. It's potting soil. You know how often you have to water to make sure that basil plant is ready for harvest. You know how to raise your chicken, the feed that goes into it. Think of alternative sources to feed your chickens, to ensure that you control your costs. A lot of farmers, especially in the poultry industry, complain about the high feed prices. So obviously, if you could make your own feed, that is fantastic. Going back to farming as well, if you could make your own fertilizers, your own compost, that is also one way of managing and controlling your costs, because fertilizers you might need to buy every single week, put into your small operation, and it could be quite heavy on your cash flow, especially if it's not yet a fully fledged business. So I think just look at your business overall. But I think the most critical thing to take care is that if you enjoy doing something, raising cattle, farming goats or sheep, or growing fruits and vegetables, or maybe just processing, and you see that people want your product and there's a demand for that, definitely start pursuing that in a gradual manner. Service 5 clients, because those 5 clients might refer you to an additional 5, and that business can grow in numbers. And then you obviously need to make sure that you could meet that demand. So that's pretty much my 2 cents for tonight, just to say this is how you could turn something, a hobby, into a business. And if you're also watching and are not really interested in farming, but you so much landed onto our page this evening, and you're also trying to figure out what are the ways that I could earn additional income, this is something that you could just use the hobby that you're so passionate about. You could use it into turning it into a business over and above farming, and maybe talking about something more grander along the agricultural value chain. If you like giving advice, if you are an economist in a financial institution, and you can see that there's a gap in the market where farmers do not have access into information, and you like speaking to farmers and consulting with them, maybe farmers could look at using your consulting services, and might not have a problem with paying you for that hour. That is something that could definitely turn into a side hustle at the end of the day, into a business at the end of the day. I know with COVID, the term side hustles has become quite popular, but I think this is just some of the information that I could share with you specifically on farming, to say this is how you can turn your small farm, your small garden project into a farm, into a sustainable business, even if you don't have the desire to go big and become a commercial farmer or start a commercial production, and you've just got certain targets from a revenue perspective or from a supply perspective that you are pretty much comfortable with, then really it's up to you and it's your choice. But this is just how you could turn something small into something small that wasn't a business before into a fully fledged business, and serving customers that definitely have a need and demand for your product. So thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you on Thursday. And if you missed this podcast and you're just tuning in right now, you could catch us on our social media channels, more so our YouTube channel, where this podcast will be played after this live. And so, yeah, please, like I always emphasize, please engage and interact with us. It's always great to hear your feedback. It's always good to know if the podcast is adding value. And if there's any topics that you would like us to discuss on the Farming Podcast, please share those suggestions, because this podcast is for you. It's for us to help you improve in your farming journey, whether you're a startup farmer, whether you're a farmer currently scaling, or whether you're a farmer looking to diversify and you needing such a bit more in-depth discussions or expert advice from professionals in the industry. Share those recommendations, and we'll make sure that we could bring expert guests who could obviously unpack the topic that you want us to discuss. So that's it for me this evening. I bid you good night, and please join me on Thursday at 8 o'clock as we will be resuming, and hopefully this time with a guest. And look out on our social media channels in terms of what topic we're going to be discussing on Thursday. And feel free to also send questions before the live so that we could make sure that we address them in the live podcast on Thursday. So good night, and thank you so much for watching. Take care.